So, as we continue to look at the Pentateuch, we see that one of the major concepts that comes through is the revelation of God not being like other religions talk about polytheism and competing angry beings in human likeness or like animals, but rather the revelation comes from God of one perfect being who is before all things, underpins all things, is all good, all righteous, and all true. And in Exodus, we see a revelation when Moses asks, "Who shall I say has sent me?" that God reveals that he is I am, the one before all beings, the one who has self-existence, who is good and true. We also read that God is one in contrast to many. And this means more than just one in number, but also one in perfection, like a foundation that holds all things together. And the word Yahweh means this one who is before and in and through all things. And the word Adonai, meaning Lord, means that God is ruling, that God has all honor because he is so good and perfect, as well as being loving and kind and just and redeeming. These names carry meaning and they evoke relational connection. That is, it's like Father, or Jesus said, Abba Father, one who speaks to us, and then we respond knowing we're in relationship with one who is greater, stronger, more perfect than us, leading us to be part of who they are. It brings a sense of stability and identity and confidence in who we are because we have confidence in who God is. It brings less anxiety and fear because we know that the goodness and stability of God leads to a good, stable existence more widely. It reminds us of the need to reframe our thinking from our fragmented way to a way that's connected to God's unity and goodness. It has therapeutic value. It reminds us that we can have relationship with a living God who is outworking good things in a physical, real, natural world, as well as in unseen realms, such as mathematics or music or beauty, in that this is all connected as one rather than as fragmented ideas. That is, the mind is not disconnected from realities. It's not separate and isolated above or below. It's not less than the material or more than the material. It's part of all aspects of a unified existence of which God underpins and unites all things. So we're encouraged in this view through understanding who God is, and we're called into a sense of relationship with him as he has reached out to relate to us, as we see described in Genesis 1. God makes the world, makes us. And he's interested in us. And as he speaks to Moses, so he seeks to speak to us. And there are moments through our life journey where we sense God speaking into our lives. And if we take a walk sometimes and are open to him, we sense him speaking into our lives as well. The name Yahweh, I am, is a personal name also in which, even though God is supreme, God is perfect, he's also seeking relationship with us. It calls us to trust and intimacy in prayer and in conversation, in asking questions of God and listening for answers. It calls us to be open to the transforming presence of God as we come to him in worship, not because we're wanting to change him through our worship, but we're wanting to respond to the beauty and perfection and goodness of who he is and speak in a sense of awe and majesty of that which we get a glimpse of, like we do at a sunset or a sunrise, or seeing a magnificent painting or sculpture, or hearing a beautiful piece of music. We speak out that sense of awe in worship, and we discover we're in conversation with the one who is that which is above all and beyond all. Rudolf Otto, in his book about the holy, speaks about the greatness and perfection of God that is beyond us. And so, as we read about Otto and this sense of Otto writing about perfection and holiness, in the idea of the holy, we see this description that it's beyond who we are, and it speaks of perfection and beauty. And so, in the idea of the holy, Rudolf Otto spoke about it's beyond reasoning to consider the perfection of God. And as we enter into worship and relationship with the one who is beyond just our reasoning capacity, then we're caught up in his very presence, and we begin to journey towards him and be transformed by that sense of wonder and perfection that we enter into. So let's be open to that sense of revelation and perfection that God calls us into as we're open to this sense of wonder. It reminds us that there's not many gods out there, but there is one who is perfect, who is in all places, who is sacred, who is part of ultimate reality that we can relate to and be blessed by through our relationship with him. And the book of Exodus and Deuteronomy helps lead us into that sense of perfection. Other scholars have written about this, like Alvin Plantinga, who said, how we believe about God and who he is shapes who we are and how we think about reality. And in a recent book by John Mark Como, he describes some of the ways in which we understand the name of God is able to change our lives. And so John Mark Como reminds us that the personal relational name of God, I am the one who is behind all things and in all things, can bring about a transformation of our understanding not only of God, but also our understanding of who we are. Other scholars too have written upon how knowing who God is and speaking out and seeking to use words to express our understanding of God can change us. James K.A. Smith, who wrote You Are What You Love, remind us that there are affections that are very real in our lives. And if we don't acknowledge what the affections are, that which we love, that which shapes who we are, and what desires drive us, then we can be like a car going along with no conscious understanding of where we're going and what is happening. To understand God as perfect and good is to put a hand on the steering wheel of life's journey, and to say we want to move towards the goodness and perfection that is God. To understand our loves and affections is to affirm that some of the greatest loves and affections could be towards God who is good and perfect, and aligning ourselves with the goodness of the one who creates all things and underpins all things and who is good and perfect and wants to relate to us in love, can shape the ways in which we think and journey and what we truly commit our love to, instead of randomly committing our loves to things that come along here or there. Dallas Willard, in his writing on renovation of the heart, said that the names of God remind us that our heart connects to certain thoughts and ideas, and if we don't guide our heart developments, or our parents or community don't guide them, they can move in all sorts of directions. But when we think about renovating our heart and where it's leading, and when we think about the goodness and perfection of God and begin to link our heart, it's like linking a solid foundation to that which is perfect and good, which guides the rest of who we are. Even neuroscience studies of how God and our brain changes can remind us that thinking on good things, such as the perfection and goodness of Father, can bring goodness into our lives. Names can shape what we think when we put a name on something. Names can shape where we go and what we do. And putting our trust in that which is good and loving and kind can, in fact, guide us to that which is good and loving and kind. Walter Brueggemann, in writing about the Old Testament and its insights, reminds us that the revelations of the names of God can truly shape heading in the right direction. John Mark Como, God Has a Name, is a useful book to read if you want further insights into the name of God and the change it can bring in your life. In chapter 1 of Comer's book, God Has a Name, we are reminded of Exodus 34, 6 and 7, which reads, "The Lord is merciful, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, and he keeps love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Yes, he will by no means clear the guilty, and sin and iniquity will fall on children and the children's children." And you'll see an alcoholic affecting their children and children's children through the wayward way they're going. Or drugs will flow on to generations. But God still remains one who is merciful, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness. Yes, he doesn't overimpose himself upon us because he's given us freedom and he's called us out to freedom. One of the great themes of the book of Exodus is the theme of freedom. That is, to truly love is to give another person freedom. And because God has given us freedom, this can underpin the notion of law. And certainly one of the reasons why the Magna Carta and other laws was written is to give freedom to people from oppression through bringing a sense of justice. But with that comes the requirement to follow those laws, the requirement to abide by them and to know the laws and to uphold them. And so freedom brings a sense of responsibility, responsibility to know, responsibility to relate, and responsibility to step into all the requirements that come along with that sense of freedom. And so God, in his love, because he's also just, he doesn't step in to remove all sense of freedom, but he calls people to step out of their wayward ways, to step back towards his love and goodness and kindness, and to be restored by their own choosing in response to his love, as Jesus showed as he called people to repent and turn rather than forcing his will upon others. John Mark Comer, in his book on God Has a Name, begins by speaking of the importance of names, particularly in the ancient world, and the importance not so much of the name God, which is just a loose word. Gods are all sorts of, they could be spirit beings, they could be statues, they could be what you hold to be important. But he speaks more of the word Yahweh, that is, the one who is really behind all things, foundational to all things, giving birth to all things, giving life to all things, both in creation but in the present. The life-giving one, like light and water. That is, some people think of God as an abstract force or an abstract concept, or that which is talked about by the church down the road or talked about by a denominational institution or something that's written down. But rather, God is that relational presence of the one who brings all things into being from before time and through time, and even underpinning that which is good in our present time. In the context of Exodus 34, which comes immediately after the golden calf incident, where they make their own sense of guidance in the world, a golden calf constructed by humans to draw people together, yes, socially, but leading people away from the very character and revelation and name of God being revealed in this move from Egypt towards a better land. Comer highlights Exodus 34, 6-7 as a most quoted passage which reminds people of the goodness of God beyond the limited perspectives of surrounding nations. Many people struggle with false images of God, either too distant or too generous, either too harsh or too soft. But Comer exists that God is who he is, true. And because he's true, like a very straight line that's being used to measure in an architectural construction, he can't be moved from who he is. But God is also personal, relational, calling us in to personal relationship with him who is perfect, because he seeks to have us as his adopted, chosen, called children, moving towards his perfection and being changed towards his perfection. God chooses to reveal himself, not just because he wants to impose power, but rather because he wants to invite us to participate in his goodness and blessing that he's already began to show to us. In Zimi's book, I Am Yahweh, Walter Brueggemann begins by saying, God is a God who acts. He acts in history, and he seeks to act in our lives by entering into relationship with us most fully through Jesus, and then through the sending of the Holy Spirit, by speaking in many ways, through the word, through preaching, through other people, but also through our own thoughts. God is eager to speak, and he's calling people to listen to his true voice. God is also sovereign, and he seeks to share the goodness associated with the sovereignty of the good rules he's put in place. Rules such as gravity, that if you let an object fall, it's going to repeatedly do the same thing. And modern science is built on this concept of repeated rules. And they're called the laws of science, or laws of gravity, by scholars like Isaac Newton, because they reflected on the laws of God and how regular and ordered they were, and saw that they had a duty to describe not only religious laws, but also other ways in which God has placed laws in the natural world around us, such as the laws of gravity described by Isaac Newton. In chapter 2 of John Mark Comer's book, On God Has a Name, he describes the personal name of God, which delves deeper into Yahweh, I am, as a personal revelation of the one who has absolute being, because that can give good being and perfection in our lives that could carry on into eternity. John Mark Comer begins to discuss the importance of names, and seeing God having such a good name, we're reminded that Abraham's name is changed to Abraham. So too, who you are can be transformed and changed as becoming more like the person God calls you to be. God's name is not just about a distant God. And so when we read through Exodus and the transforming work of God and read through Numbers and read through Deuteronomy, God is seeking to change people through rituals like Leviticus, through laws like the Ten Commandments and Deuteronomy, because God is at work. But there is a limitation to this. And through the prophets, Jeremiah 31 reminds us we need a new heart, and the Gospels remind us that Jesus has come to bring a fuller transformation in every area of our life that can flow through to every community and society as well. The meaning of Yahweh, I am, is worth reflecting on more fully. It reflects perfection of goodness and beauty, perfection itself. It reflects self-existence, having no beginning or end, continuing to be there like the foundation of all things. It reflects being unchanging. It reflects being constant. It reflects being present and active in every area. There is a problem if we just go with the name God and just think of random terms. If we think of God as like a policeman enforcing rules, it's much better to understand God as the one who is complete and holy, revealed by the name I am. So let's take a few moments now to write down, what do the names of God tell us? What do the names of God, such as I am, tell us? Let's reflect more fully and deeply, realizing they can change lives. What do the names of God tell us? Let's take a few moments to write down some of the things that the names of God tell us, like I am Yahweh, and like Adonai, Lord. What do these personal relational names but foundational names tell us? Let's take 3 or 4 minutes to write down some of the things that we find from these names and what these tell us. Suman reminds us that God is only one. There is no other God. God is unchanged. He's always the same. And he's Adonai, in control of all. If you want to write a message, let me encourage you to put it on the chat, or write it down on paper as well. Thanks, Samantha. That's very helpful. Thank you. Let's take a few moments to write down these names.
Oh, oh, how are you, my bro?
फाइन यार के भयो हाँ बोल्यो
आज बोल ठिक भयो एक हप्ता मलाई भइसक्यो
हेलो चन्द्र दाई,
फेरि
माइक अन छ है तपाईँको?
माइक अन रहेछ
So Yehuda or Gresham, do you have some thoughts? And Sudesh, do you want to tell us what stands out to you, Sudesh, while others are writing down what the names of God tell us? Sudesh, what do these names of God tell you? I am, He is one, Adonai, Yahweh, Lord. What do these names tell you, Sudesh?
Yes, sir. God has different names, many names according to his attributes, his character, and his abilities, like Jehovah Rapha, Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nissi. It means Lord who heals, God who is our provider, and Lord who is our victory. So in Bible, he has different names according to the testimony of people, according to how he worked in the lives of people and how he blessed them. So we can use those names in our daily life as well, in our prayer time, in our personal time with him, in his presence, and we can call him by those names because all of those names, he deserves it all, and we can call him by different names.
Yeah, so good. What a blessing we have and an opportunity we have to learn and know more about God through his names and to then be able to share that with others. As we move on further to chapter 3 of John Mark Comer's book, God Has a Name, we're reminded of names that express the compassion and graciousness of God. And firstly, we're reminded in that chapter that was read that God is compassionate and gracious, and that encourages us to be compassionate and gracious to one another in relationship. We're reminded that the word passion or compassion is like parental love when a father has compassion for their children or a mother has compassion for the child they're caring for and raising. Kindness too and favor is a reminder that God is one who is kind and caring towards us. And Jesus, in reminding us of the love of God and how God watches over each one, encourages us that we can have confidence in the compassion, care, and love of God. In chapter 4, John Mark Como reminds us of the Lord God being patient and slow to anger. So too, we're encouraged in our lives to be patient and slow to anger, but also to recognize there's a danger in pushing a father, mother, or parent too far. And so judgment could come. And so if you break laws too far, then judgment can come. But if we turn, repent, seek the goodness of God, then we can know the grace of God. There are times when we journey and we may feel down or feel the going of the way is hard. If we allow these tougher times or dry times like a desert to turn us to grumble, then troubles can arise. But if instead we turn to the goodness of God, then we can know avoiding of judgment and no avoiding of the judgment that come against us. So this chapter is a good reminder that there is a danger both in the judgment of God if we go too far the wrong way, but also a danger if we allow impatience and anger in our own life and we bring judgment when we shouldn't be. We should be trusting God, who is the perfect judge, who orders all things. Let's not step in and try and carry out God's word or judgment for him. Rather, let's be open to the goodness of God. In chapter 5 of John Mark Como's book on God Has a Name, he reminds us too that God is not only the one who is just, but he's also the one who abounds in love and faithfulness. And so we can not only rest on the kindness, love, and faithfulness of God, but we can take it into our own lives and share it with others so that they too can be transformed. God doesn't just love, he overflows with kindness and love towards us. And when we drink that in and are transformed and changed by it and sing and thank God for who he is, then we're able to share that with others. And God continues that love to thousands, and we too can continue to show that love to others in ways that bring an abounding of God's love. Yes, guilt will bring punishment, but there is a way out of that, and through Jesus we find that answer. Yes, sins come upon people and upon their children, but God is able to lead people out of that situation of sin into abundance. And then as we draw to the close of John Mark Como's book on God Has a Name, we're reminded that the names of God encourage us to live in light and to develop a character that reflects the goodness of God, to sing in worship and to be generous, to align with God's good character in every area of our life and in every way we can, so that we can be transformed by Him, to enter into relationship with God as often as we can through Christ, and to allow God's Spirit to flow into our lives. Yes, Exodus 19:6 reminds us that God is loving and kind, but it also reminds us of judgment. But beyond judgment, it reminds us that we can turn back to God. I recommend to you John Mark Como's book, God Has a Name, because it's a resource that can really help us to enter more fully into relationship with God and to grow in understanding not only of who God is, but in relationship with God that allows His presence to flow through into our life in ways that change our thoughts, our heart, our actions, our desires, and our very being. Other scholars too have written on how knowing the names of God, meditating on them, can influence and change our lives. Alvin Plantinga, a philosopher who is a Christian, said that the very way we know is changed by knowing God as true and perfect. Surely that reminds us of the importance of truth and perfection in all knowledge and in all ethics and all we do. Truth is central, and good knowledge is central to a flourishing life. Plantinga also reminds us that we need to reason carefully, thoughtfully, knowing that God has provided the ground of our ethics and relationship one with another and with truth, but we need to build on that wisely and soundly, continuing building truth on truth as God reveals His very being and truth into our lives. We have freedom in order to build and grow. We can either do that in a healthy way, or we can turn away from God's good revelation to a wayward way that'll do damage to ourselves and others. Nicholas Wolfenstorff, on his writing on how divine names of God shape ethics, relationship, behavior, social justice, and human dignity, reminds us that our understanding of people being valuable, having value, is based on our understanding of God, who is good and perfect, bringing people into existence. That is, being made in God's image of perfection means that every person has great value. In his book, Justice, Rights and Wrongs, Wolfenstorff says that human dignity and value is grounded in God, who is perfect, of great value, who gives life and a name to people. God's not just and compassionate for Himself, but in His love, He brings justice and compassion to every human person, and we need to respect that. This calls us to moral responsibility towards one another and towards others, just as it calls to responsibility to God. And it calls us to be active in building social relationships that bring people into a greater understanding of what is true and good for them. Jacques Derrida, in writing on the importance of language, reminds us that the language we use for describing God can also relate to the ways in which we see the world around us, whether it's chaotic and crazy or whether it is well ordered because it's orchestrated by God. And this can lead us to taking up responsibility and acting ethically. Surely these insights into the importance of the names of God remind us that a greater understanding of who God is and his names can bring transformative insights into understanding who we're called to be and who we can be through a greater understanding of and relationship with God, and with and through his son Jesus, and with and through his Spirit that's poured into our lives. Walter Brueggemann, the great scholar on the Old Testament, wrote that God's name is relational and covenantal. That is, God's name shows that he's wanting to enter into relationship with a people, that he's calling into covenant relationship with himself so that they might become perfect and good like he is perfect, beautiful, and good. God is relational because he's calling people into relationship with him and seeking them to respond to his covenant call with a yes, I am willing to enter into that covenant relationship with God, who's willing to enter into covenant committed relationship with us. In Exodus 3, verse 13 to 15, when Moses asks for God's name and he responds, I am. He's speaking of the unchanging perfection and goodness of who he is. And as we respond to this and thank God and enter into the relationship with God, who is consistently, unchangingly good and perfect towards us, we can be changed through his love and grace to becoming more in line with his goodness and becoming like he is. It's a dynamic relational name that calls us into relationship with the one who is perfect, holy, and good. God's name is not a formula that we just speak to magically bring things to pass, but rather it is a call to relationship that brings change from him to us as we're changed into his likeness. It's revealed in our history, in our life journey, in order to change us so that his history and life journey guides our history and life journey towards his perfection. The ethical dimensions of God's name, of goodness, holiness, and justice call us to be participants in his goodness, holiness, and justice. And the command to not misuse God's name is a command to be careful not to follow corruptions or injustice of our understanding of God or truth or self so that we go astray. It's an encouragement to return to the goodness of God so that we may know the fullness and goodness of all God's purposes for us. The name of God is a call from the one who's faithful towards us to be faithful in response and towards him. N.T. Wright, a New Testament scholar, said the name of God is a call to be transformed and changed into the identity of his son Jesus, who reveals the goodness and perfection of God that we read about in the Gospels. The name of God is a call to be transformed by the presence of his Spirit that brings God's goodness into our very life. That is, Father as a name for God reminds us that God brings all good things into existence. Son is a reminder of the name that Jesus journeys with us, alongside us. And Spirit is a reminder that God's presence indwells and fills us, so that God's goodness is both before us, alongside us, and within us. To understand God as Father is to understand his intimate call and to pray trusting in him. To understand Jesus as Son reminds us that we are disciples together, transformed by his lordship. And to understand the Spirit of God's active presence brings confidence in the transformation and power that comes by his being amongst us and in us. Recognizing God and Jesus as Lord is recognizing that he has the greater knowledge and understanding that calls us to the better way and that calls us to the better understanding of mission and purpose in the life journey and the goals towards which we move. Psychologists such as William James remind us that how we understand our religious experience and who God is transforms and changes us. And so to understand Father as a caring, loving God calls us into caring, loving understanding with others and with ourselves towards goodness. It calls us to be loving and caring for all that is around us, for one another, and in so doing to be transformed by love so that we are accepting of ourselves as well. To understand God as Almighty and omnipotent doesn't lessen our understanding of ourselves, but rather elevates our understanding of what is good and true. It does bring a sense of awe and humility, but it brings that awe and humility that brings transformation in our lives towards goodness. So the names of God change the way we think, the way we relate, and even the ways in which our mind and psychology and social relationships outwork. So as we've reflected on these understandings of the names of God, I encourage you to take some time to begin to apply that in your lives. So let's take a few moments as we have our 10-minute make it a 5-minute break. So we'll have a 5-minute break to reflect on how do the names of God change your life for the better? How does an understanding of the names of God change you and your life for the better? And we'll come back in about 5 minutes' time as we look at the final section of today's class. See you shortly. Thank you.